Radio Free Skaro.
Hello everyone, welcome to Radio Free Skaro, episode number 734. I am Stephen in Edmonton.
I'm Graeme in Toronto.
And I'm Robert in Ottawa.
Hello, gentlemen. Dear listener, this is a different lineup than what you're used to. We arranged this episode, talk about Graeme and Robert's new book, Who is the Doctor 2, which is coming out on March 17th, available from many good bookstores. Your local bookstore, which I'm sure delivers, which is important in this day and age. We had this circled on our calendar thusly because originally Warren and Chris were going to be off traveling at different places. Obviously, that's not the case, or it likely will not be the case by the time this episode comes out, or indeed the next one. It's a weird time in the world right now, and we'll keep doing the podcast because we're shut-ins to begin with. A lot of people are working from home now, if they can, if they're lucky enough to be able to, and we'll hope to try and entertain you and keep you distracted from the world weariness from week to week. To that end, I had both you chaps on for this whole episode thinking that we would talk about the news, but honestly, if it's just stats, we only do that to torment Warren, and Warren's not here to be tormented, so it seems kind of silly. Although maybe I will ask you, I mean, what are your thoughts? Graeme, you had a segment on the most recent Reality Bomb with Tom Spilsbury, who writes a monthly column in Doctor Who magazine about Doctor Who viewing figures. What are your opinions on the viewing figures for Doctor Who Series 12?
I have to say that, Tom is absolutely right. There is a certain extent that ratings do not matter to the extent that fans believe, that there are all kinds of other metrics that Doctor Who is being judged by, and Doctor Who will be on the air for as long as Doctor Who wants to be on the air. But even so, it feels... let me try and find a hockey metaphor. It feels like when your favorite team suddenly starts losing games, and losing games that they're up like 4-0 at the end of the second period, and all
right.
This, it feels like that. And so, yeah, it is a little bit hard to sort of see that that the Timeless Children has the same overnight rating as the Eaters of Light. Like, ow, why? This season is so great. This season is so spectacular. Why aren't people watching? What do I have to do? Go to Britain and ring doorbells one by one? Like, this is not right. So that's what I have to say on this subject.
I see. Robert, do you have anything to add to that offer? Contradict, perhaps?
Yeah, I'm not worried. I'm
not worried either.
I mean, Doctor Who ebbs and flows, and I think generally, like when there's exciting things like a new Doctor or the first female Doctor, of course you're going to get extra viewers. And when you've got a lot of really intense fan service, of course you're not going to get people watching. I mean, I was writing an article for Battlestar Galactica, a book, and I had to look at the ratings of that, and the episode that the fans absolutely love is also the lowest rated one. That stuff just kind of happens. Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah, I mean, I look at it like how lucky we are that Doctor Who is still being shown on BBC One on prime time on a Sunday night, or on TV on a Sunday night. I think most of Doctor Who's competitors now, I suppose, if you want to look at it that way, are basically on streaming services, on Netflix or Picard. The current one right now is on CBS All Access. It doesn't necessarily have an actual broadcast window in the US. It does in Canada here. But it's available at the beginning of the day on Thursdays. So Doctor Who is the only one that's sort of being broadcast in a legacy media sort of way. And I still think, I mean, obviously I'm biased because I follow Doctor Who people on Twitter and stuff, but when Doctor Who was on, I feel like, it was trending every single week. And I'm not sure if I've looked at the trending topics after episode 1 of like Star Trek Picard, for instance, and noticed that like people were talking because everyone was watching it at a different time. And sure, fewer people are watching Doctor Who at the same time, but there are still the vast majority of the audience is still watching it,
Yeah, and honestly, when you look at the ratings, it's still in the top 30 or 40 programs. It's still it's still doing quite well, and its audience, its appreciation index scores are starting to boost up again. I think there's a lot to like about it. I guess for me, what I keep on thinking is why couldn't we have had this season last season, and then because I watch a story like the Haunting of Villa Diodati, and I'm just like, oh man, this is brilliant. I want more people to watch. But I think as you say, I mean, we're in a time when Doctor Who is on television. It's still doing well. It's still got 2 heartbeats. Let's just enjoy it. You're absolutely right, gentlemen.
And also, I mean, people are seeking alternate ways to watch. I'm not talking about the torrenting or anything like that. I'm talking a lot of people are choosing to cut the cable and just buy the season on iTunes and wait till the next morning to watch it, or on Google or Xbox Live, or like a whole host of different ways to watch it now without actually paying for cable. And to tie a bow on this and to segue to our main topic, which is of course your book, I was astounded, and I suppose it makes sense, but I was still astounded that 2012 is when you put out the first edition of Who is the Doctor, which covered, of course, the first 6.5 seasons, 7 seasons basically of the new series. And I said this on this show a couple weeks ago. The first Netflix original drama, which was House of Cards, came out February of 2012. Up until then, everything was basically being broadcast as live. Nowadays, we don't have that. Everything gets dropped at once. Everything, it's a streaming world. People might record it and watch the whole series later at their leisure. Like the overnight viewing figure is I think long since been relevant. And I think maybe even like the live plus 28. Like I think people are just waiting maybe 2 or 3 months and then watching Doctor Who in the off season, so to speak.
That is entirely possible, and I think you're right. I think the paradigm has shifted in between the time we wrote the last book and this book. There is so much. I think Doctor Who sort of started just at the start of what we call peak TV now, which is that there's just so much television, and now so Doctor Who is a part of a very different landscape, and the fact that it still can distinguish itself amongst a much more competitive landscape than it was when our first book came out is very true.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's been 7 years since you wrote the first book. It seems like an astounding amount of time. Why now, gentlemen? Why did you choose now of all years to write the second version of Who's the Doctor, continuing on from all the way up until the end of Jodie Whittaker's first season?
Well, we had to wait till there were at least 28 episodes shown.
That was a stipulation, wasn't it? Yeah.
No, I mean the problem is they kept delaying stuff, and then they kept casting new doctors, and they kept kind of shuffling around. We had quite different plans, and so we kept kind of rolling it back again, and then finally we're like, right, we're calling it, we're going now. What could possibly happen? And so there's a new series on when the book comes out. Like, oh well.
yeah. We planned this book. We started talking with ECW about doing this book in 2015, and the plan was to do effectively a volume, I think, with Series 7, the 2013 specials, and then Series 8 and 9. And then all of a sudden just as we were getting ready to sign contract, they delayed the 2016 season to 2017, and all of a sudden they added a new doctor, and we had a very different book in mind.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, obviously you have the first, the first Jodie Whittaker series. Was it important, I suppose, to have that first season with Jodie Whittaker in there, possibly, just as a hook, saying, "Hey, we're talking about the current Doctor," but also, it's also important to have like a very small yet unfortunately vocal portion of the Doctor Who viewing audience. My Doctor Who doesn't end at 2017; it continues to go on with Jodie Whittaker.
It felt very when Jodie Whittaker was cast. I think what Robert and I said to our ECW's publisher was, it will feel wrong to do a Doctor Who book and have Peter Capaldi as the central silhouette on the front cover, because we normally have silhouettes of the Doctors on the covers of our books. So we thought it's going to feel wrong to have a Peter Capaldi silhouette, larger than life, being the central figure, and we have Jodie Whittaker playing the Doctor. So that became very important to us. And I felt very strong. I think Robert did too, that we want that, this is such an amazing moment for Doctor Who that we had to document it.
Yeah, I think it's also good that we're not finishing at sort of, the end of a Doctor, because that feels too much like, we're just wrapping this up. And so, yeah, Doctor Who's, the great thing about Doctor Who is it never ends, right? There's just going to be always more. And so we sort of jump across one more season and there's more Doctor Who to come in the future. Just happened to be a lot sooner than we thought it was going to be.
Right. Or later, depending on your point of view.
Yes.
So, given that we last talked to you about the first book 7 years ago, just describe the concept of the book. I'm still starting with the first edition, and then how you've carried that on into the part 2.
Yeah, so it's an episode guide to all the stories that are shown, at least all the stories shown on BBC One. So there's lots of little mini bits from the Matt Smith era, which we talk about, but they're not part of the main thing. And so the idea is that we categorize what's there. So we talk about the monster each month, and what's the the relationship between the Doctor and the companion. We sort of chart how the Doctor's like arc goes and things like that. And then we also have 2 reviews where one of us takes the major position and then one takes the minor position. And sometimes we agree, mostly we don't agree. We're very different people, so we often have quite different kind of views on things. And I think what that does is it does a couple of things. It kind of makes it more conversation rather than just we're telling you what to think. Because Doctor Who fans are great for having lots of different viewpoints, and you can go to the local tavern and have huge debates into the night, as we always did anyway with each other. So I think we just recreated that. And it also doesn't say that there's only one way to think about this. It's like we have our viewpoints. The reader can have another one. That's all fine.
I think it tries to capture the whole of the fan experience. So on the one hand, you have the sort of cataloging side of things, which we cataloging of stats of when did these continuity references occur, who are these monsters, and then there's the sort of more critical side, which is what was the funniest moment, what are some trivia bits where we just don't understand the plot logic, or how does that work, and then you sort of get into the full Monty of fandom, as you will, where you just come on with a full-hearted opinion of the episode, and then the opposite opinion comes back at you. So I think we try to capture the multifaceted nature of our fandom in our books, and by doing a guide to each episode that ends in a review from 2 people talking in conversation with each other.
I think I might have mentioned this 7 years ago, and forgive me if I'm doing it again, but hey, it's 7 years ago. I see this, and also forgive me for this comparison, I sort of see this as a kind of spiritual successor to the Doctor Who Discontinuity Guide, in that you sort of list the sources, the roots and references perhaps, and various little connections to the Doctor Who series past. Was that a conscious effort on your part?
Oh, very much so. And I think I said to you 7 years ago it was. It's we will never ever stop saying how indebted we are to the Disco Guide. It was a very important book to me when it first came out. I love that book, and I read it religiously when it came out, and continued to do so. And there was there was an enthusiasm about Doctor Who to it, but there was an irreverence to it that made it really, really delightful. But it was also very insightful, and I just adore it. So it's a glorious book. And so, yeah, we very much see it as sort of the spiritual descendant of it, for sure.
Do you hold that book with the same amount of reverence that Graeme has, Robert?
Yeah, I absolutely do. I mean, I generally really love reference books, and as a kid, I always found like them totally fascinating. Like that, they would be some of the most gripping reads I'd ever have. And not just Doctor Who, but there was Andy Lane's Babylon 5 book and things like that. But yeah, the Discontinuity Guide was really kind of a breakthrough book. And yeah, I remember actually I saw an early copy of it just before it had been published, and one of my friends was sort of doing some editing of it, and I was just like, "What is this? Like, I have to read this." And then it was months before it came out, and so yeah, I agree with Graeme. It's a fantastic book, and it really is kind of the descendant of like what we want to do.
At the same time, I want to point out that this is not a slavish copy of the Discontinuity Guide either. I mean, we really I feel we went to a lot of trouble to come up with our own voice with it. Some of it came from editorial edict. I think originally we wanted to we cataloged a lot more in our original version of Who's the Doctor, and the editors sort of said, we don't want this for a variety of reasons. Some of it was litigious, and some of it was just it's boring. And Robert had the genius idea of we went from a category called accumulated trivia to a category called interesting trivia, where it became more of a reflective exercise of what is the trivia in this episode that is worth talking about and why, and so I think that sort of gave us a way in that I think has sort of carried us lo these 7 years and 4 books later. So yeah, it is. I mean, it's very much a spiritual descendant of the Discontinuity Guide. But I remember once. Elizabeth Miles joked with me when she saw Who's 50. She said, "What did you do? Just copy for the Doctor Who stories from the classic series? You just copy over the roots from the Discontinuity Guide?" And I said, "No, actually, we came up with our own, and frankly, we have a more detailed list of roots than Paul, Keith, and Martin's book had, partially because we have a little more room than they do."
That's true. Part of what this is my last topic on the Discontinuity Guide, and we'll move on, I promise. But what I liked about the Discontinuity Guide is, I think it came with like a 95, and it just goes right just when you thought that Doctor Who was sort of like, that's it, it's over, and then all of a sudden this wonderful book comes out. You had the knack to put Who is the Doctor 2 out 2 weeks after Series 12 finishes airing, and probably about 16 to 18 months until it comes back on our stream. So basically, I think, honestly, I know it's probably coincidence, but I think it reflects the reflective nature, as you said, Graeme, to just looking back at Doctor Who stories again with a little bit of distance again. And I think it's wonderful to do that. You're not just sort of like, getting a series. You're like, oh, it just happened, let's get it out. You're looking back at some of these episodes that perhaps you haven't seen in years, and you're actually having to write and formulate opinions on them. I mean, was that difficult to do, I suppose, is the question here.
Yes and no. I mean, Robert probably can elaborate more than I can, but I think, for me, it was interesting. I remember doing the review for the Doctor Witho and the Wardrobe, which I had not watched in years, and frankly had not thought about in years. So to come to it and sort of we started this book knee deep in the Peter Capaldi era to sort of come to the sort of Matt Smithiest of Christmas specials was very very jarring in some ways, and yet in other ways it was. I really enjoyed the journey we took with the book to start sort of at the very cusp of Series 6 and sort of go do that lead up through the 50th anniversary and then into the Capaldi year and then Jodie's first year. It was quite a varied ride, and I really enjoyed it for that reason.
Yeah, I would say like it wasn't difficult at all. I mean, I love the excuse to watch Doctor Who, so this book is great. And I think I'd actually just done a run through of the whole sort of modern series anyway, because I was showing my then girlfriend, and so I was just like, yep, okay, have at it, let's do it again, and this is great. And yeah, I mean, like Graeme's right, it is quite the journey that you go on, because the journey from sort of Matt Smithy Christmas special to Jodie Whittaker, there's a lot of twists and turns there, and it really feels like a different show. It's massively evolved through the course of that, and that's wonderful to chart.
It is weird still to me. This we are pretty much in our 15th year of modern Doctor Who, to be existing alongside Doctor Who as it evolves, because we grew up in the days of KSPS TV and TV Ontario and watching a whole story every week, and we would watch 4 or 5 Doctors over the course of a year and a half or something like that. So it does seem somewhat jarring to sort of go back and watch Matt Smith's last season. And then there's the Day of the Doctor, which is amazing still, I think. But I think I've also sort of like held it back. I'm going to tell a bit of a story here, in that I went and saw... there's 2 things actually this year. I watched Star Trek Deep Space Nine for the first time in 20 years, and I went to see 2001 Space Odyssey in the theater. I also hadn't seen that in like 20 years, because I knew that I loved it back then, and I didn't want that feeling to betray me if I was to watch it again. So I was always hesitant. I was so pleased that I liked Deep Space Nine and 2001. And I have to say, Day of the Doctor was such a magical experience on November 23rd, 2013, that I would feel like, I have to talk about this thing now. I watch it again, and just sort of like, is it going to hold up? And I don't know how you feel about Day of the Doctor, but that's where I sort of place it on the pantheon. So I feel like that one would be a very tricky one to write about.
Well, I had a similar kind of feeling about it as you, which is why when we actually wrote the book, here's a peek behind the scenes. The last entry we did was Day of the Doctor. And some of it was because it's a bear of an entry with a lot of continuity and a lot of references and those sort of uber stories take a long time to do. So I just felt like I want to do that one last, because that's going to involve the most amount of work. But at the same time, it's also that sense of, I'm not sure if I want to go back to this one right away, because I have such amazing memories of seeing it and seeing it again and again and again. And like you, I am doing my Deep Space Nine rewatch right now, and I saw 2001 in the theaters. So all this kind of tracks. But I have to say, I was amazed at how much it holds up, and I was amazed at how much it sets the agenda for the Capaldi era in more ways than one. I mean, it sets it in terms of Gallifrey, being around and its sort of influence on the Capaldi era. But I think it also sets the emotional tone for the Capaldi era. It sort of has that sort of the equation of the sort of emotional intelligence that I feel that the Capaldi era started to use more and more. That if you add sort of emotions to your storytelling, you can create a wow effect. And I feel like the Day of the Doctor is one of the first real dawnings of that. The scene with all the Doctors together and Clara basically making them look for a better way is so powerful, and you can definitely see it has a massive influence on the Doctor Who that follows.
Was it tough for you, Robert, to write about such a momentous episode? Did you also leave your bits until the very end like Graeme did?
Well, I had to, because Graeme was doing the major opinion, so I had to respond to him. And I was like, oh, come on, Graeme. Come on. You can do it. You can get there. It was tough in a different way for me, because I'd written about Day of the Doctor for the Outside In version of the new series. And so I, in some ways, felt like I already said my piece on it. I was like, what else am I going to say? And so... I'm very clear on, I don't want to repeat myself on these things. And so, I'm actually quite happy I did find quite a different angle on it. But yeah, it's a big story. And how do you do justice to something that big? That's, I think, the inherent challenge there.
Yeah, the interesting trivia bit is like 2.5 pages long. Like it's
It really
like
is.
there's a lot there, because this is a book that is also, I mean, sure, we're Doctor Who fans talking about it, but it is, I assume, also meant for people who are perhaps watching this series for the first time, and they're going to watch the stories first before they read the your writing about them. But I assume you have intended this book to also sort of be for someone who is relatively new to the series.
I think when we pitched the book to ECW, we described it as a book that someone will buy for their partner who is a Doctor Who fan, read it, and end up reading it themselves. And so, see, the idea is that we feel that we can do both, that you can write a book that has in-depth stuff for the more in-depth fan, I guess, and more casual, and can also be read by a first-timer. And we thankfully had an editor who had an eye to that right from the get-go. I mean, I remember she gave Robert the note during the writing of the Aliens of London entry in the original Who is the Doctor. And she said, "Oh, I thought the Slitheen were classic series monsters." And Robert said, "Oh, no, they're not. But that is a very good point, because you can actually, so Robert wrote some to that in the entry. And I think Jen Hale, our editor, very cannily sort of helped sort of remind us of the newbie perspective as we did it. And it's always served us in good stead, because we feel that you can do both things in this book. And I hope we do.
Yeah, I mean, we're basically, I always say we're writing on two tracks. So you're sort of simultaneously writing for, the hardcore nerd just like us, and then also the newbie who's not like us at all, and still would like to follow along. And I must say it's been very successful. That a lot of people have said, yeah, I'm not a hardcore person, but I read your book and I followed along and I learned all kinds of cool trivia. And then the hardcore fan says, oh wow, that was a cool presentation of all the trivia I already knew. And so that's to me, that's perfect.
It's a tricky thing. It's kind of like being a showrunner and like appealing to all the fans who have watched the show for years and decades, and also appealing to someone who is watching it for the first time. So well done, both of you, for towing a very, very distinctive line there that only a very select few people have been managing to do over the years. So hats off to you.
Well, thank you. I mean, as I said, I give full credit to our editor, Jen Hale. I mean, I remember when I did the entry for, what was it? I guess The End of the World. And I had a joke that involved the invasion of time. And she's like, I have no idea what this story is. What's the point? And so, and she's right. And she was, and we were ungrateful little shits with her. But in the end, she was right. And we rewrote it to take out the continuity reference. And surprise, surprise, it's a better for it, because you're actually speaking to the broader truth of the scene that actually matters something. So I've always sort of had those lessons that we had very early on in the writing and the editing of Who's the Doctor, sort of to serve us in good stead for the next 7 years.
Yeah, I mean, I always say that, Doctor Who fans, we very much forget about the other 5.5 million viewers. Like, most people watching Doctor Who don't read online forums. They're not going to talk about it. They're not going to do very much else other than just watch the episode. And that's the vast majority of the audience. And so, we always think, oh, but it's all about us. And it's frankly really not.
No, it's why I watch other shows and don't do podcasts about them, because I just want to
Really?
know what the other half. It's like Star Trek Picard. I watch it and then I might listen to a podcast about it, but I don't do a podcast. I don't read blogs about it. It is such a wonderful existence. That's so, like, a book like this. If it was like for someone I was talking, oh cool, I'd like to know what these two people have to say about Doctor Who. That's a nice accessible way to get into a couple of different Doctor Who opinions. So I think you've hit the mark there regarding the target audience on this. Just looking back, I mean, I got to get your full opinions of every single episode, but I mean, Series 7, I think perhaps at the time everyone was sort of like, oh wow, Doctor Who's building up to the 50th anniversary. in retrospect, perhaps there are some hits and some misses in that, perhaps because Stephen Moffat was devoting all of his attention to actually getting a workable piece of drama on the air and on theater screens in 90 different countries at once. What was your thoughts looking back at Series 7 when writing this book?
I mean, I enjoy series 7. For the most part, actually, I think the first half is quite good, except for A Town Called Mercy. The fact that there's two really pretty good Chris Chibnall stories is pretty amazing to me. It certainly was at the time. It goes in some odd directions, but I think it actually hangs together reasonably well. I think part of the problem is, of course, you watch it over, on first viewing, it's over the course of a year and a bit or something. Like they really spread it out, and that I think harms the viewing of it. Whereas, if you kind of watch it all through, which I did recently, you're like, actually, this pretty much holds up. And it's true that the 50th anniversary did hover over it, which is less true now. So I think that gives a bit more breathing space.
I feel much the same, I think, but I also feel like the second half of the season is better, with a couple of notable exceptions. But I think the first half I love the sort of high concept, movie poster style of writing Doctor Who. That was a lot of fun. I mean, Lord knows I love Dinosaurs in the Spaceship and The Power of Three. Those are great stories. But the second half for me is for me the more substantive one, partially because I thought Clara had a great introduction. I think The Bells of St. John's is a really glorious, basically a season opener, effectively, and it's an amazing story. And even the more experimental ones that people don't like The Rings of Akaton, have a real kind of, hey, let's try this, and let's try and do an alien society differently than we've done it. So I really appreciate what it's trying to do, and Hyde's like that too. It has the biggest faceplant of the whole season with Journey to the Center of the TARDIS, but otherwise, I mean, even Nightmare in Silver, I think, more underperforms than is a failure by any stretch of the imagination. So yeah, I love the second half a lot.
Apart from the episodes that you actually talked about individually, but which raises a question. I mean, perhaps maybe you both had different opinions on the ones that perhaps are more universally slagged. You sort of had one of you writes a major and one of you writes a minor, sort of like a response to that. How difficult was it to sort of pick and choose? How did you choose that? And did you make your choices based on episodes you really liked, or perhaps episodes that you didn't like and just had something really important that you felt you wanted to say about them?
I can never remember anymore, Robert.
Yeah, mostly we go for episodes we like. I think it just makes sense to not not destroy yourself writing a lot about an episode you don't enjoy. I mean, of course, sometimes you just get settled with one, or sometimes you think you're gonna like it on rewatch and you don't, or something. But generally speaking, I say we try and lean towards, if we like something, we'll try and take it. And of course, there's some episodes we both like, so then we kind of split the difference. There's some episodes we both don't like, so that's how it falls. But often there's episodes where we're quite split, and then we know which one we want to do. So it mostly falls out.
Yeah, and sometimes there's just ones that you sort of pick because, okay, I guess one of us has got to do it, and it's like, oh wow, that's great. For example, probably one of the bigger split decisions we had on Series 7, actually, and one I didn't name, but from the second half that I love, is the Crimson Horror. I was kind of meh, it's Mark Gatiss in his safe comfort zone when I kind of first watched it. And when I watched it again, I was like, wow, this is great. I really love this. There's a couple of bits that I think I would do differently, and I would prefer them to do differently. But for the most part, oh yeah, that camp horror, yeah, bring it on, please. So yeah, and I think there is a sort of element of surprise to doing it.
Mm-hmm. It's a Paternoster Gang spin-off show, essentially, that never actually happened. Yeah,
effectively, but it uses the Paternoster Gang well, and for the most part, I really don't like Strax as a character. I don't like how he's used, and I don't like how the Centaurans have gone from being being kind of a satirical and yet menacing monster in their first appearances to suddenly becoming the comedy figure. And this is one that actually uses Strax really well, and even uses the comedy aspects of Strax really well. So for me, it pays off, generally speaking, and you know, the whole idea that the Paternoster gang would go on a rescue mission for the Doctor is a great hook.
It is. Yeah, that was a pleasant surprise, I think, when I watched that in the last few years, I think, as I recall. So I look forward to reading what thoughts you had about that one in the book. It's no secret that I think Peter Capaldi is perhaps my favorite Doctor. I mean, no offense to any of the others who certainly played the character in recent years or anything, but I hold up Series 8 and Series 9 to a fairly high regard, perhaps more highly than a lot of others. Where did you chaps sort of have it in the pantheon of Doctor Who seasons at the time? Did that change or alter any when you came to write the book?
I think we both loved season 8 at the time, actually, perhaps more than the average person. I think it's a great season. I think it holds up really well. I think Capaldi's brittle, but that works for me. I get why it doesn't work with some other people, and you know, I appreciate they mellow him later. But for me, it's a run of very good stories, and I really like what they do with Clara. I think she's much improved with Capaldi compared to Matt Smith. So I think season 8's a real winner. I think season 9's a little bit kind of all over the map. To me, it doesn't cohere as a season. Like it's got some very good stories, but it doesn't really hang together the way that Series 8 does.
Yeah, I mean, like Robert said, when we first watched Series 8, I remember talking with Robert, and I was like, wow, this is kind of like when Eccleston was the Doctor. Like, you have a well-established heavyweight actor suddenly coming in and playing the Doctor, and it's like, wow, this is so cool. I found on a rewatch, though, that I really found Series 8 much harder going. I don't like the Doctor as asshole, effectively. I don't like, I find there's brittle and then there's just unlikable. I really found, there's stories that I loved from that season when I originally watched, like Into the Dalek, which I really find hard going. Like, the Doctor is just so unsympathetic, but he's got some wonderful scenes too. I mean, don't get me wrong, you know, Not Like That, Get It Right is the perfect introduction to the Doctor that he did not get in Deep Breath. But there's a lot of real harsh things about his Doctor that really don't work for me. It turns the corner for me at Last Christmas. Last Christmas is, for me, my favorite Capaldi story. It's my favorite Christmas special, and it's a wonderful Doctor Who story. So for me, that's the sort of the point where they sort of start to figure out how much the Doctor should be sort of unlikable, and how much the Doctor needs to connect better with the audience, and they started thinking about that, and they softened him, and I think I agree with Robert that the overall flow of Series 9 isn't as good as Series 8. I think Series 8 has a better arc. I think Series 8, the stories hang together better. I think that the individual stories are better, but I do think the first several stories of Series 9 suffer from a massive blight on their budget. It was quite clear that they're doing them cheaply. They're doing single episodes and spreading it out across 2 parts, as opposed to necessarily having 2 episodes worth of story. But I like the Doctor much better in them, and I like the Doctor and Clara's relationship in them much better. So it's this weird kind of hodgepodge, because there's things I love about Series 9, and there's things I love about Series 8. So and for very different reasons. It's
shocking in a way to watch Deep Breath now.
It really is.
Just by how crass and callous the new Doctor is. But there's always that sort of sentiment from a showrunner to sort of like, to make the new Doctor much different than the old. I think, Matt Smith and David Tennant were similar enough in age and energy level, I think, that, even though they're wildly different, I think, in my mind, and probably yours too, there is still a sameness to them because they're both played by young white men. All of a sudden we have an old, grumpy gentleman in the title role, very reminiscent of William Hartnell. So I think that's perhaps why I appreciated him more than I perhaps loved him at the time, just because there was that sardonic and the type of doctor that would knock the skull out of a caveman with a rock. That doctor was sort of back, and you sort of like, okay, well, if we were familiar with the first few weeks of Doctor Who back in 1963 and 1964, this makes sense. But do you think perhaps that kind of approach to a new Doctor in 2014 maybe wasn't the way to go?
I think casting by contrast is always not necessarily the best thing. I think Jonathan Turner had the same dilemma. He cast Peter Davison, and he did it as a deliberate contrast to Tom Baker. And then when he had to cast Peter Davison's replacement, he had to contrast to a contrast. And so on the one hand, he got many things right with Colin Baker. On the other hand, I do think there were things like the costume and other things that were done because he needed to contrast against the contrast. And I think having cast Matt Smith to be much a contrast to Tennant's Doctor in terms of being sort of more Troughton-esque and more kind of absent-minded professory, to suddenly do a further contrast is tricky. All that is to say is that I don't want to bury Peter Capaldi, but rather to praise him, because I think the one thing that happened in between Series 8 and Series 9 was, I think, a determination to the Doctor's character, which I think was fundamentally brilliant, which is that the Doctor should be an aging rock star. And the idea of the Doctor as aging British rock star is such a genius move. And the moment he's playing his guitar in The Magician's Apprentice, and suddenly he has a swagger to him. And he's not sort of playing Doctor on the Spectrum, being really super, withdrawn and not really relatable. It gave something for people to latch on to, and something for people to gravitate towards. And hell knows I gravitated towards that. I love aging rock star Doctor.
He's basically living your fantasy, Graeme, essentially in Series 9, isn't he? And maybe you too, Robert. I don't know.
I love that reinvention too, right? Like, I think it is really brilliant when he just comes out as, he's on a tank with a guitar and so on. And it's such a flag in the sand for like, yep, this is who the Doctor is. And at the time I really hated the costume change. I was like, oh no, but we had the costume. Why are we going with this terrible hoodie and stuff? And now I love it. Like, I think like he really just made it his own. And so, yeah, he pulls that off brilliantly, I think.
Yeah. When you look at the table of contents, it's amusing because, there's Series 9 and it's just followed immediately by Series 10. Of course, it isn't. There's a whole year off in between. 2016 was basically the year of no Doctor Who again, and not for the last time either. And then Series 10 comes around, which is like the season basically that Stephen Moffat was never really intending to write. You can kind of tell that he is wrapping a bow around it with the Husbands of River song, and it's almost like, okay, we'll do one more, basically. That the second encore, essentially, is what Series 10 is to be. I don't know, how do you chaps feel about that, and then how did you sort of go about writing that for the book?
Well, I absolutely adore season 10. I think that, it has some weird stuff with the monks in the middle. It has a couple of dodgy places, but I think that the setup is so brilliant. I think that coming to Doctor Who through Bill's eyes is just works such a treat. I think it's it's a shame it didn't happen a year later in some sense, because it's the perfect jumping on point. It wasn't the place where people actually did jump on, but they could have so easily. I think that they build up the whole sort of, setup with Missy and stuff like that very carefully and very slowly. It's a great mystery. It really wants to make you know who's in the vault. I think it's fantastic. And I think where it ends actually is really good too. Like, I think that, the World Enough in Time and Dr. Falls is really great stuff. And even Twice Upon a Time, which is, sure, it's a bit of a tacked on coda to a tacked on coda. It doesn't matter. It's still great. Like, I think that this is a great way to go out.
This is where Robert and I have more of a series of disagreements. It's I really loved Series 10 the first time I watched it, and I think what I loved about it was Bill's introduction. I think the pilot is a brilliant story, just stone cold brilliant. And it has a lot of great stories like Oxygen too, but it loses its way. Rewatching it, I was struck by how much it loses its way sort of partway through the season, and I think Missy being in the vault was a mistake. I think there are any number of things that could have been in the vault, up to and including John Sims' Master, that would have been so much more intriguing, shall we say. I think the problem is that the more weight Missy takes, the less weight Bill has, and so you have started with this brilliant audience identification figure and this new companion and you have and she's wonderful and everything sort of builds up to this massive climax point. Only it's in the lie of the land, and you've got 3 more stories with her, and they sort of and then they sort of kind of get rid of her in a very perfunctory manner, and then they bring her back the next story and still get rid of her in a perfunctory manner. So I really it leaves a bad aftertaste in my mouth, because I do think I do think in some ways there's so many things I love about that season, maybe more than all kinds of things. And it is, even though he doesn't play his guitar very much, it is very much even more aging rock starry Doctor, which is great. And I love the Professor vibe, and I love the idea that he's trying to teach Bill about things, and I even love Nordole. But yeah, I think it's arc construction really just kind of, when I rewatched it, I was just kind of like, yeah, whatever about Missy. What the hell happened to Bill?
Right. I think the him as professor was a perfect outlet for Doctor's speeches, which I find were sort of becoming a thing in the Moffat era, certainly in the Matt Smith era. And then it's Capaldi perfected it, and like, where could he go from then? He just sort of orate as a university professor, and I thought that was, as you say, Graeme, was a natural fit. He was teaching young people to eventually one day become aging rock stars.
Yeah, I mean, I love the time and relative dimensions in space, speech in the pilot. I love the space, the final frontier speech in Oxygen. I mean, they're both marvelous speeches, and of course, Capaldi just knocks them out of the park.
Yeah, he's so good. I'm not, don't want to spoil too much from the book, but I will ask and perhaps criticize, for I don't see it necessarily in some of the entries. Is there any sort of like progress report through the course of the Capaldi era about the length of his hair?
There really isn't, and that is a mistake, and I will
Thank you.
Rectify that. I also, I felt very bad about that, because I do think, frankly, that Capaldi just gets better the higher the hair. The higher the hair, the closer Peter Capaldi goes to heaven.
But then it just flops down in Twice Upon a Time.
I know.
So like it just collapses under its own weight.
A metaphor for Twice Upon a Time in itself.
Whoa! Look forward to reading those reviews for that one. We come to Jodie Whittaker's first series, and of course the last series that you write for in the book, which you obviously wrote before you watched series 12, which you have already said you quite enjoy. So what was your opinion and thoughts about writing for series 11? You're already your least favorite or lesser favorite Jodie Whittaker series, I can probably guess.
I think Robert had a much more positive kind of view of it on rewatch than I did. I really liked series 11 on the first time. The second time I found it the sort of space procedural that Doctor Who had become was I could see the sort of limitations that the format had sort of imposed on itself, and was kind of getting frustrated by it. I was also there's things about Jodie Whittaker's Doctor I love, and almost all of it. There are things that I just felt they weren't giving her the opportunity to do. Part of that was the space procedural format. There's no need to have the Doctor do a massive oration if you're not going to do if your plots are all about solving a problem. And so it becomes a much I wanted the Doctor to have dramatic speeches. I wanted the Doctor to be right. Like I felt like the Doctor spends a whole lot of that season being wrong about everything. In like Kerblam, she's not right about a single detail. And so I found it more frustrating. Although Robert, I'm going to let him speak for himself because I think he really got into it much more on rewatch than I did.
Yeah, it really stood up for me second time around, and I didn't think it would. And I remember thinking a bit like, do I have to rewatch this thing, read this book? And I was kind of dreading it a little. And then I thought, a lot of it stood up really well. I was very pleasantly surprised. I think the biggest problem is just the sheer episode length. I think that if it was 42-minute stories, they'd be really tight, and that'd be awesome. They just bloated at 60 minutes, and that's a bit of a shame. But otherwise, yeah, I didn't mind the Doctor being wrong about stuff. That's fine. Actually, I think, part of the problem these days is everybody has to be right all the time. I actually like that she's not, and then she's willing to make up for it and apologize for it and then change her views. Like, those are actually pretty radical things these days, and I'm on board for that. I just find her infectiously likable. So I'm in for more Jodie, whatever she's doing. Like, it's great.
I find she's infectiously likable too, and I agree with that. But I also disagree in that I feel there's being wrong and having teachable moments, and I feel there's being wrong all the freaking time. And she goes through the whole of Demons of the Punjab is predicated on her not getting a single detail of what's going on right. And then you go from that into Kerblam, and you just kind of like going, when are we going to get I want her to have the same moments that every other Doctor has, where she's come up with a brilliant plan, and she knows what she's doing, and she's absolutely spotted it right from the get-go. And they gave her that this season, which is why I really love this season. But and it's sort of what Petra Mayer says about why didn't we get the Doctor with a good speech? Why couldn't we have the Doctor with a classic monster doing it is defended moment? Like, because she wanted the same things that the male Doctors had, and I'm glad that they finally given her that. I do think that you can sort of see the massive course correction that's happening with Resolution. I think Resolution sort of suddenly says, yeah, this is probably more what Doctor Who's going to be like next year, and they were right. And it makes me, the story is yet to be written why Doctor Who wound up the way it was in Series 11. I think it's going to be a very interesting story once the course of those NDAs run out, and people can talk about it. Because I think there is a very, very, like, Doctor Who has got some interesting things going on that doesn't quite working, and I want to know what kind of catastrophic failure led to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it too is it's taking on very big ideas. Like, it's not the Doctor fights Zygons anymore; it's the Doctor fights racism and stuff. Like, these were going to be tough things to do to get them right, and they don't always get them right. But the fact they try in the first place, the way they do, I think is great. I understand it's not for everyone's taste, but I think too it might also look a lot better, sandwiched between seasons 10 and 12. Like, I think that, having a completely standalone like series is maybe, like if that's just going to be what it is forever, that's very different to, we just did a one-off series with no returning monsters. I mean, I personally, I really liked the refreshing nature of that. So, like, I think that was actually quite overdue for modern Doctor Who. So that it really worked for me.
I would have liked it a lot more if there had been more stories like the Witchfinders and Demons of the Punjab, perhaps, that sort of had a little more meat to them. I mean, I do agree with you that the great thing about this season is that it's doing the kind of high concept idea version of Doctor Who that, say, they did in Series 7, but instead of dinosaurs on the spaceship, it's the Doctor meets Rosa Parks. It's trying to sort of it's trying to have a little more ambition to it, and I think that ambition sometimes works. I think Rosa is a brilliant example of that. I think Rosa is a story with 11 out of 10 moments in a story that's kind of 6 out of 10 otherwise. But the 11 out of 10 moments are all you care about ultimately. And of course, I mean, that's the great thing about Doctor Who.
It is. And then there's Series 12, which you've already said you liked. I don't want to have to wait another 7 years to get you two in the same room to talk about it. So pretend you're writing your maybe you already are writing your first section of Who is the Doctor 3. How would you sum up Series 12, and how would you divvy up the episodes? I wonder to sort of write the major and minor points to them.
Well, that's a very good question, Robert. What one would you pick for this?
I take them all and make you be second person every time.
No, that ain't gonna happen. I would pick Spyfall. I would pick Spyfall. I would pick.
You're not the only one, Graeme, who makes that mistake.
Yeah. I would pick Spyfall for sure. I'd pick Praxeus. I'd pick. There's a few I'd pick. I'd pick the Haunting of Villa Diodati. I probably wouldn't pick the finale.
I'd take Fugitive of the Jadoon. I'd probably take the finale. Yeah, I mean, it's not too hard because we fall into such different camps in so many ways that we know what we like. We can grab those.
Yeah, so I probably those would be broadly the ones I'd pick. I mean, and I'd probably do Colony 55 because even though I do think there's lots of things wrong with it, there's lots of things that it's attempting to do right, which I think needs to be applauded at least and given a more favorable review than others might give. So not necessarily Robert, just saying.
I actually really enjoyed Orphan 55. I thought it was great, and then I was like, oh, I wonder what the rest of the world thinks. Let me check the internet, and it's like, oh,
yeah, I had that same reaction in real time watching it with my friends. But yeah, I mean, overall, I love the season. I think like I said, I think Resolution sets the tone for what the season's going to be. I think it's as though they said, okay, you know what, space procedural of the week isn't quite working. Let's just go back to doing Doctor Who stories and okay, then let's twist it like a corkscrew. Did I need it to sort of end in a gambit for the Morbius Doctor to be true? Not quite sure, but hey, it's got the Master and the scariest Cybermen I've ever seen, so I'm on board.
I needed it to end that way. I absolutely needed that. It was awesome.
Yes. New Adventures reader Robert Smith.
That's right.
Yeah.
For me, the only story that I actually didn't like was Can You Hear Me? And yet I understand, why that's a really important story in lots of ways. It just didn't gel for me. Everything else, I was like, this is great stuff, or this is, totally fascinating failures.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
No, we're pretty much aligned, at least in the sort of top level review of the season.
Well, I look forward to. I'm glad I heard it. I'm glad I heard a sneak preview, so that in 7 years' time I can act surprised all over again when we talk about the third in the ongoing trilogy, shall we call it, of Who is the Doctor, available from ECW Press. Who is the Doctor 2, available on the 17th, St. Patrick's Day. From all good bookstores everywhere. By the time this episode comes out on Sunday, you will have had a book launch. Is that right?
That is correct. We're doing it in Toronto, and we're doing it at Stormcrow Manor, which is a very geeky restaurant. I call it the sort of geek version of Chili's, but which mostly just to annoy Warren. But it's a great place, and I'm looking forward to kind of connecting with Toronto fandom, who I haven't seen in a while.
Yeah, and I think one of the great things about ECW is if you buy the hard copy, then you get the ebook for free. And so I know people who like to have the book but also want to read it on their device, and so I really like that aspect.
That is fantastic. That's what you buy Blu-rays, and you get the digital copy as well in the case. So that is excellent. So well done, ECW Press, and well done both of you for writing the book and also appearing on the podcast. There, we talked about that in ranking order of impressive achievements. Book second. Oh, it's been lovely to have you both on the show, talking about the book, and just to talk to you in general, because it's been quite a while. It's been a couple weeks for you, Robert, but it's been a while since I talked to you, Graeme. So it's thank you both for appearing on the show this week.
Well, thank you for having us, Stephen.
I mean, we can talk Doctor Who anytime.
Pretty much, yeah, absolutely. Like, you just call me on the phone randomly, Stephen, and I'll talk to you about Doctor Who. I mean,
I have considered it. And it's a long year and a half probably of no Doctor Who. Hopefully the world will be in a better place that they'll be making Doctor Who come September. But if not, well, we'll call on you again to get various Doctor Who opinions and points across and everything else that goes along with it. Next week, speaking of Graeme and other projects that you've had on, we are finally doing our Who for Schools commentary for School Reunion.
Oh, man.
That's next week. Warren and Chris are with me for that, for the whole episode. So do join us for that. Watch some Doctor Who with us in the comfort of your own home, away from everyone else, staying safe, staying isolated, and being kind. So until next time, I am Stephen in Edmonton.
I'm Graeme in Toronto.
And I'm Robert in Ottawa.
So long for now.
You've been listening to Radio Free Skaro. Find us online at radiofreeskaro.com, follow us on Twitter and Tumblr at Radio Free Skaro, subscribe to us on iTunes, and donate to the show at patreon.com/Radio Free Skaro. Thank you.